100 Pounds Down is proudly brought to you by my agency, JKD Global Travel, curating moments of purposeful immersion for professionals to recharge, recenter, and reconnect with what matters most. Start your journey at jkdtravel.com. Welcome back to 100 Pounds Down, where we preach the gospel of GLP-1 and the word is good. If you are thinking about taking weight loss injections like Mounjaro, Zepbound, Wegovy, or Ozempic, you're already in the middle of your weight loss journey, or you're heading toward that maintenance phase and wondering, what comes next? Bring it in. This is GLP-1 Bootcamp Part 1. Before you can really understand how these meds work, you need to understand how your body works. And so that's what this video is all about. When you eat, your digestive system secretes enzymes that break the food down and pull out nutrients. Any carbohydrates you eat are turned into a type of sugar called glucose, which floats around in your blood. Your blood sugar level is a measure of how much glucose is floating around in your blood. Your pancreas's job is to stabilize your blood sugar within a safe range. To do this, it secretes two different glucose modulating or sugar managing hormones, glucagon and insulin. Glucagon makes your blood sugar levels go up, while insulin makes them go down. They do this by telling your body what to do with the sugar. Either use it immediately for energy, convert it and store it away to be used at a later time, or pull it out of storage so it can be used. In an optimal situation, your blood sugar is neither too high nor too low, because insulin and glucagon are both doing a good job managing things. When your blood sugar is too high on a regular basis, that could indicate that your body doesn't have enough insulin to bring it back down. Your glucagon is doing the most or too much. Or there's some kind of dysfunction where the cells in your liver, your fat cells, or your muscles aren't obeying the insulin's commands. Chronically high blood sugar levels or chronic hyperglycemia can result in type 2 diabetes. So let's review really fast with this knowledge check. What is your pancreas's job? Stabilizing your blood sugar in a safe range. What are the names of the two glucose modulating, aka sugar managing, hormones made by your pancreas? Glucagon and insulin. Now we have to talk about your gastrointestinal system, also known as your gut. There's way more sophistication and more specific pieces to your GI system than I'm explaining here, but I'm not a doctor and I don't want to get too in the weeds. So to simplify things, just think of your gut as being divided into sort of two main zones. Your upper GI system, which is the top half, which includes your stomach, and your lower GI system, the bottom half, which includes most of your intestines. Remember how I mentioned earlier that your digestive system breaks food down and pulls out nutrients? That's just one of your gut's jobs. Another one of your gut's jobs is to help get rid of what's left over after all of the nutrition has been pulled out. And surprise, your gut has yet another job. It makes two special hormones. The fancy group name for these two hormones is called incretins. And your gut only releases them when you take in nutrients. In other words, typically only when you eat or drink something. So before I go any further, I need to explain peptides. Again, I'm not a doctor or a scientist, so I'm going to try to keep this super simple. A peptide is a type of hormone, but it's just a short one. By short, I mean, if we were to pretend for a second that, say, the chemical formula for a hormone was a chain of every letter in the alphabet just strung together. A peptide is just a hormone where the chemical formula's chain of letters is just not as long, okay? So remember that. Now, back to incretins. The first of the two incretins just might sound familiar to you because it's called glucagon-like peptide 1, or GLP-1. Its name is pretty self-explanatory. It's called that because, chemically speaking, it looks very similar to glucagon. Remember what I just explained about peptides? So let's apply our pretend example again here. If the chemical formula for glucagon was every letter in the alphabet strung together, GLP-1's chemical formula would be maybe only the letters A through K. Get it? GLP-1 is made by your lower gut, and it does two things. One, it makes your pancreas generate more insulin, and two, it makes your pancreas generate less glucagon. The second incretin is called glucose-dependent insulinotropic polypeptide, or GIP. That's a mouthful, right? Well, one of the things about medical terminology is that a lot of times the way something is named is designed to actually give you clues about what it is or what it does. There's an awesome guy here on YouTube who I follow, Chubby Emu, who is a doctor, and he tells medical stories. And in every episode, he breaks down the medical terminology like this. So I've got to give him a shout out here. I've also put a link to his channel in my description. Okay, so let's break this down. Glucose dependent. That's telling us that this incretin is sensitive to sugar. The presence of sugar is going to make it do something. Insulinotropic. So in medicine, the suffix tropic means being turned toward something, having an affinity for something, or having an effect on something. So here it has an affinity for insulin. And then polypeptide. The prefix poly has several meanings in medicine, but here the meaning is many or multiple. A polypeptide is a hormone made up of multiple short-chain peptides. So let's put it together. This incretin is a sugar-sensitive hormone with an affinity for insulin and a chemical formula made up of multiple peptides strung together. It's made by the cells in your upper gut, and it makes your pancreas generate more insulin and more glucagon. It also helps the cells in your pancreas that are responsible for making the insulin grow and survive. Got it? I know that was a lot. So let's review the info about your gut with another knowledge check. What is the fancy name for the special hormones that are released by your gut when you eat or drink? Incretins. What are the names of the two incretins? And it's okay if you just give the letter names. Glucagon-like peptide 1, or GLP-1, and glucose-dependent insulinotropic polypeptide, or GIP. What are the two things GLP-1 does? It makes your pancreas generate more insulin, and it makes your pancreas generate less glucagon. What are the three things GIP does? It makes your pancreas generate more insulin. It makes your pancreas generate more glucagon. And it helps your pancreatic insulin cells grow and thrive. Great job. So that's the tea on how your body works, part 1. In the next video in this series, we'll get into how your metabolism works and the idea of insulin resistance or metabolic resistance. So stay tuned. So this is Bootcamp 2. Before you can understand the science of how this medication works, you really need to understand how your body works. And that's what these videos are about. Drugs work. In our last video, we learned about the important parts of your pancreas and your gut and how they play a part in managing your body's glucose levels. And now, if you haven't seen Bootcamp Part 1 yet, I highly recommend that you go back and watch that first, because this will build on that and then come on back. The beauty of having YouTube and videos is that you can always hit pause and come back later. This video, we will be focusing on your metabolism, metabolic resistance, and the chronic disease process of obesity. Your metabolism is the chemical process that takes place inside your body as it converts the food you eat into energy that keeps you alive and functioning. Your metabolism is the generator that powers you, and calories are the amount of power it uses. As a concept related to the human body, calories can be confusing. That's because we talk about them like they're an object, but in reality, they're nothing more than a unit of measurement. And again, here's where I toss out my disclaimer that I'm taking some liberties here by having a much more simplified explanation just so we can keep things clear. The same way a watt is a unit of measurement that tells you how much power a light bulb has, a calorie is a unit of measurement that tells you how much power comes from the foods you eat when they're converted to energy inside your body. Your basal metabolic rate, or your BMR, is the minimum number of calories that it takes for your body to continue to function while you're resting. Essentially, if you stayed in bed and did nothing but stare at the ceiling for an entire day, your BMR is the number of calories, aka the amount of energy it would take simply to maintain the tasks that keep you alive that day, like digestion, breathing, pumping blood, and the like. On any given day, keeping you alive takes up around 2/3 of the energy that's available in your system. The other third goes toward converting your food into fuel and powering your physical movement. Now it's time for our first knowledge check. What is the chemical process of converting the food you eat into energy to maintain your bodily functions? Your metabolism. What does a calorie measure? The amount of power that comes from the foods you eat when they're converted to energy inside your body. How much of the energy in your body is spent on simply keeping you alive? Two-thirds. Remember how in Bootcamp 1, we talked about how your pancreas sends out glucagon and insulin to tell your body to use or store sugar for energy? With this new information we've learned, we can now introduce a new name for that process. It's glucose metabolism. We had to talk about that first so you could get an idea of how blood sugar is involved in this process, but that was only part of the story. It's a little more complicated than that. That's because your body actually uses two energy production and storage processes in order to be more efficient, one for sugar and the other for fat. There are three primary macronutrients in the food we eat: carbohydrates or sugar, protein, and lipids or fat. Calling something a macronutrient is just a fancy way of saying that these are the nutrients that make up the biggest part of our diet. There are others, but for purposes here, we'll focus on those three. Carbs, protein, and fat each convert to energy in your body, and the amount is measurable using calories. 1 gram of carbohydrate converts to 4 calories of energy, and the same is true for 1 gram of protein. Fat, however, is the most calorically dense macronutrient. Each gram of fat converts to a power-packed 9 calories worth of energy. This is what people are referring to when they say they're counting calories or counting carbs. Converted carbohydrate and protein energy is stored in your liver and muscles until the sugar and amino acids that they've been broken down into are used to fuel or repair your body. And this is where I have to take a quick but necessary detour to explain proteins, which honestly are pretty cool. Proteins are interesting because they're not just an energy source. They also work as sort of a jack of all trades building block within your body. Your body is really resourceful, and proteins are one really elegant way of showing that off. Think of proteins like a bunch of cars in an auto salvage lot. Say you're rebuilding a classic car from scratch and you just need that one special part to finish things. You might look around and find a part from a completely different model than the one you're working on, but notice how it still works perfectly for your needs. So you go ahead and install it. That's essentially what proteins often do inside your body. For example, if you get into a situation where your blood sugar level drops dangerously low because you don't have enough glucose, your liver can take protein, break it down into amino acids, and turn that into glucose for energy, a process called gluconeogenesis. Gluco meaning sugar, neo meaning new, and genesis meaning creation. The creation of new sugar-based energy from non-sugar source materials. You know what time it is. Time for another knowledge check. What are the 3 primary macronutrients? Carbohydrates, sugar, protein, and lipids, or fat. How many calories are in 1 gram of each of a carbohydrate, a protein, and a fat? Carbs have 4 calories, protein has 4 calories, and fat has 9 calories. What is gluconeogenesis? The creation of new sugar-based energy from non-sugar source materials. Now, let's talk about the second energy usage and storage process that occurs in your body, the one for fats, also known as lipid metabolism. Adipocytes are fat cells, and they are the long-term storage facility of your body. Their primary job is storing energy from lipids. The collection of these fat cells is called adipose tissue, or body fat. To make this easier as we go along, I'll refer to the fat you eat as dietary fat, and the fat your body stores as body fat. As I mentioned earlier, converted carbohydrate and protein energy is meant for short-term storage inside your liver and muscles until the sugar and amino acids they're broken down into can be used to fuel or repair your body. When the amount of food you take in is more energy than can readily be used in the short term, your liver needs some place to put all that extra energy. So it will convert that energy into body fat and send it to your fat cells so it can be used in the future. This process of creating fat from non-lipid sources is called lipogenesis. Lipo meaning fat, and genesis meaning creation. The creation of new lipid-based energy from non-lipid source materials. That newly created fat can't get where it's going on its own, though. Fat can't travel in your bloodstream, so your liver combines it with protein so it can get where it needs to go. We've talked about the creation of body fat, so now we need to talk about the destruction. When people talk about burning fat, they're referring to a process called lipolysis, the process of the body breaking down stored fat into fatty acids to use as energy, to keep us warm, and for insulation. So let's revisit our old friends from the pancreas for a moment. As we learned in Bootcamp 1, your pancreas secretes insulin and glucagon, which modulate your blood sugar levels. Those two hormones also have roles in lipid metabolism. Insulin stimulates lipogenesis, and glucagon stimulates lipolysis. Time for another knowledge check. What is the process of creating fat from non-lipid sources called? Lipogenesis. True or false? Insulin lowers blood sugar and stimulates the creation of fat. True. What process are people referring to when they speak about burning fat? Lipolysis. When you regularly take in more energy than your body uses, your adipose tissue expands in two ways. First, your individual fat cells grow larger in size. And second, your body starts to make more new fat cells to handle the volume of fat that is being stored. Body fat near the surface level, the layer right underneath your skin, is called subcutaneous fat. If that continues to happen over a long period of time, your body runs out of space and begins to create those new fat cells in places where adipose tissue isn't supposed to be, like in or around your liver, your heart, your pancreas, or even your muscle. This type of body fat is called visceral fat. When the food you eat is high in dietary fat or high in carbohydrates, the excess body fat is stored in a format called a triglyceride. Everyone's body has triglycerides, but this format can be dangerous when there's too much of it because the fatty acids that are released when triglycerides are burned can be toxic at the cellular level, promoting cell dysfunction and cell death. In addition, scientists now know that adipose tissue isn't inert. For years, they thought it was just neutral, but now it's confirmed that adipose tissue secretes hormones that trigger a chronic inflammatory response throughout the body, as well as chemicals that blunt our ability to properly respond to insulin. So, when we put those three concepts together, when the food we eat is high in dietary fat or high in carbohydrates, and we're regularly eating more energy than our bodies can spend, and our bodies have gotten to the point where they are creating new fat cells in places where fat cells shouldn't be, the fat that is stored in that visceral fat is the most dangerous fat of all because it is toxic on a cellular level and dangerous for our internal organs. In the pancreas, this cellular destruction impairs the ability to properly secrete insulin, and in some cases can lead to the inability to create insulin at all. Your muscles, fat, and liver stop responding effectively to insulin, which hampers their ability to pull glucose and fats from your blood and store them. This dysfunction is called metabolic resistance. But that's only one way that this process occurs, because that information assumes that every person started from a genetically, a hormonally, and a pharmacologically neutral standpoint. Scientists have also proven that genetic propensity, the use of certain medications, and the presence of other overlapping medical conditions, among other factors, can absolutely have an impact on a person's propensity or susceptibility toward metabolic resistance. Regardless of the underlying inciting cause, the longer this continues to occur over time, the more dysfunctional things begin to get. Destructive changes at the cellular level can also alter the processes of lipogenesis and lipolysis themselves. leading to abnormalities in weight gain and the difficulty in weight loss. When it's put all together, this constellation of conditions and disease processes, along with chronic inflammation and the resulting increase in risks for cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease, kidney and gallbladder disease, comprises the chronic disease of obesity. It's a lot. Yeah, so let's do another knowledge check. What type of fat is located in or around your internal organs? Visceral fat. What format of stored fat is the most dangerous? Triglycerides. What is the constellation of conditions and disease processes, chronic inflammation, and risk of adverse health impacts called? Obesity. So that's the tea on how your body works, part 2. Was there anything new that you learned about the metabolic process here or obesity today? Let me know in the comments. So now that we finally got that deep background on some of these processes under our belts, now we can finally move to the final video in this Bootcamp Explainer series, where we'll go into the mechanics of GLP-1 medications and how they work in our bodies. So stay tuned. Well, this is what you've finally been waiting for, GLP-1 Bootcamp Part 3. And I'll take a moment to apologize in advance if the sound is a little bit crazy or if the lighting goes a little wonky. I am on site in Fort Lauderdale for the conference that I told you about, and I wanted to make sure that I got this information out to you all. So I am recording this from my hotel room in Fort Lauderdale. In this video, we'll go into the nuts and bolts of how these medications work and why this changes everything. If you haven't yet viewed Bootcamp 1 and 2, which explain how your body works and the metabolic process of obesity, I recommend that you take a look at those 2 videos first, because the information that we went over in those 2 videos will be helpful in understanding what we talk about in this one. All right, let's do it. First off, with all of our background information under our belts, we can now start referring to these medications by their official name, Incretin Mimetics. Put simply, Incretin Mimetics are medications that mimic the gut-based hormones that regulate your metabolism. Anytime you see the suffix TIDE or tide at the end of a medication, that's your hint that it's an incretin mimetic. Everyone's buzzing about these medications like they're a hot new thing, but in reality, incretin mimetics have been around for almost 20 years at the time that I'm recording this video. The very first incretin mimetic, exenatide, which had the brand name Byetta, was approved for type 2 diabetes management all the way back in 2005. People taking Byetta had to give themselves an injection twice a day. The reason today's version of these medications have captured our attention is because they're improvements on the previous versions. They're stronger, longer lasting, more efficient, or some combination of all of those. The first class of incretin mimetic we'll talk about today is the GLP-1 receptor agonist. As you see in the chart here, there are a number of popular GLP-1 receptor agonists, but they mostly come from only 2 different companies, Novo Nordisk from Denmark and Eli Lilly and Company, an American company located in Indianapolis, Indiana. Now, you might recall that I talked a little bit about this in my video on why these medications are so expensive. Anytime you see a medication that comes from the same company and it has the same active ingredient, for all intents and purposes, that's pretty much just exactly the same medication. The only difference is that the company, for monetary reasons and using the patent laws in the United States, is doing a strategy that allows them to keep that medication on patent for longer, therefore giving them more time to be the only person in the market that is selling that medication. So when you see Victoza and Saxenda are both liraglutide, and one is for type 2 diabetes while the other is for weight management, in reality, they're the exact same drug and they're just marketed under different names for purposes of patent protection. We mentioned previously that the first version of a GLP-1 medication, Byetta, had to be taken twice a day. You see here that Victoza and Saxenda are daily injections. Next, you see Trulicity from Eli Lilly, or dulaglutide. That medication was approved for type 2 diabetes and was a weekly medication. That medication is still on the market, although, again, as I mentioned in a recent video, all medications that are GLP-1s are experiencing some shortages at this time due to the increase in demand. Novo Nordisk is the company that's in charge of the most recent and viral sensation in GLP-1 medications, Ozempic, as well as Wegovy and Rybelsus. All three of those medications are semaglutide. Ozempic and Wegovy are the exact same medication, again, just with different formulary requirements, one for type 2 diabetes and the other for weight management. Both of those are weekly injections. Rybelsus is an oral version of semaglutide, and it is for type 2 diabetes as well. This oral medication version is taken on a daily basis. The injections are much more direct and quicker acting. But for people who don't like getting injections or have a fear of needles, perhaps the oral version of the medication would be preferable for you. Now that we've talked about some of the popular medications in this class, let's discuss the name of this class. In the body, receptors are how your cells receive instructions. It's in sort of a lock and key format, in the same way that only certain locks can be opened by certain keys. Cells receive instructions only if they come from the right type of source. A receptor agonist is a type of medication that has the right chemical code to bind to a certain type of cell and instruct that cell to do something. So in our specific situation here, GLP-1 receptor agonists are medications that work by mimicking how GLP-1 acts in the body. They bind to cells that have GLP-1 receptors and tell those cells what to do. One of the reasons these medications are effective is because of these synthetic versions of the hormones being engineered to remain in your system longer than the natural version of the hormone that your body makes. When scientists use the phrase mechanism of action, that's the explanation of how a particular chemical compound works in the body. In terms of your glucose metabolism, the mechanism of action of a GLP-1 receptor agonist is that it tells your pancreas to make more insulin and less glucagon. The result is an improvement in your blood sugar levels because there's both more insulin available to lower it and at the same time less glucagon available to raise it. GLP-1 receptor agonists also operate on your lipid metabolism by recalibrating your body's ability to effectively signal your body to properly create, store, or burn fat in a normal, non-dysfunctional way. Because the original purpose most scientists were testing these medications for was the control and management of type 2 diabetes, that was the mechanism of action that scientists expected to occur, and the specific purpose these medications were designed to achieve. Thanks in part to the lipid metabolism effects, however, other scientists were more focused on the fact that many people were also losing weight. The human body is a marvel, and a lot of science is only just now reaching the point where we can fully understand and begin to harness its intricacies. And that's the area of science where mechanism of action is not yet fully understood. Scientists have some ideas, and substantiating those hypotheses is what they're currently working on. And this is the point where I get to lean into the fact that I absolutely am not a doctor or a representative of any pharmaceutical company. Where they are restricted from saying certain things because they're bound by the tenets of their disciplines, I'm not. So I get to nerd out and tell you what some of these ideas are and what they're currently researching. I'm going to call these well-educated guesses because while many scientists are of the very strong opinion that this is how they work, the level of scientific proof that's necessary is very rigorous before any legitimate scientist will say something conclusively without giving any qualifying statements or caveats. In other words, a legitimate scientist's educated guess about a subject within their own field of specialty carries far more weight than an educated guess from someone like you or me. Fact: the gut and the pancreas aren't the only place in our bodies where GLP-1 receptors are located. Scientists know that receptors are also directly present in our brains, in the hypothalamus, as well as some other places in the body where we still don't yet even realize. And these medications are absolutely making their way to those receptors. Another fact: scientists know that these medications also influence your body's hunger signals. What they aren't certain of is exactly how. Here are some working theories around other mechanisms of action. One educated guess is that GLP-1 indirectly triggers sympathetic physiological reactions in your body that impact the physical sensations and mechanics of your hunger and satiety, aka your appetite and your feeling of fullness. We already know there are many other chemical compounds in our bodies that have an impact on our metabolism and satiety, like leptin, ghrelin, amylin, and cortisol. And many of those hormones are secreted from some of the same places in your body that we've already talked about. I'm not going to cover those hormones in this video, so if you want to take a moment, hit pause now and you can read this information. I've also added the info on this slide to the video description for anyone who is using adaptive technology to follow along. Another educated guess is that because we also have GLP-1 receptors in our brains, these medications have a direct impact on us and also influence interactions with the other neurotransmitters in our brains that modulate our cognitive processes, our motivations, and our drives. The anecdotal proof of this theory is the experience that I and so many others have had with the mental struggle of fighting an intense, nagging urge to eat or fixate on food, regardless of whether our physical appetite is present. This phenomenon is something we know as food noise or head hunger. Countless people who are taking these medications are reporting that within days or weeks of starting a GLP-1, the food noise has either been significantly reduced or it's disappeared entirely. For many of us, that single effect alone has opened up a brand new world of possibility. So let's do a quick knowledge check to test what you've learned. What is the official name for the class of medications that includes GLP-1 receptor agonists? Incretin Mimetics. In addition to the gut and the pancreas, where else in the body do we know for certain that GLP-1 receptors are located? GLP-1 receptors can also be found in our brains, in the hypothalamus. Great job. So, the mechanism of action is the how these meds do all the great things that they do. But let's clearly define what all those beneficial effects are. In other words, what specifically do these treatments do for you to lose weight? A GLP-1 receptor agonist, like the one in semaglutide, slows down how fast food moves through your digestive system, keeping you full for longer. Makes you less physically hungry by suppressing your physical appetite for food. It makes you less mentally focused on or preoccupied with food and eating by reducing or entirely removing head hunger or food noise. It improves your satiety with food so that you feel satisfied with what you've eaten and with a smaller amount of food triggering that feeling of satisfaction. And if you have diabetes or insulin dysfunction, a GLP-1 medication can lower your blood sugar and resensitize your body so it begins listening to insulin's commands again. That's how GLP-1 receptor agonists work. Next, let's talk about dual receptor agonists. These are medications that mimic two different hormones instead of only GLP-1. Once again, we are looking at Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk, but there are many other pharmaceutical companies that have their own compounds in trials, both single, dual, and beyond, and are trying to bring those to the market as well. First up is Lilly's tirzepatide, which goes by the brand name Mounjaro for the treatment of type 2 diabetes and Zepbound for the treatment of obesity. And yes, just to make it really clear, again, they are both the exact same medication. It's just branded with two different names, so Lilly can enjoy that patent protection over the medication for longer. Tirzepatide is a chemical formula that combines synthetic GLP-1 with synthetic glucose-dependent insulinotropic polypeptide, or GIP. Because it contains the GLP-1 agonist, tirzepatide has the same mechanisms of action and beneficial effects that we already covered for semaglutide, but it also has additional mechanisms that are particular to the GIP agonist. It increases insulin and glucagon production in the pancreas, reduces dysfunctional glucagon secretion, and increases the production of adipose lipoprotein lipase, an enzyme that directs fat storage and regulates fat burning. These extra mechanisms have their own added benefits. Tirzepatide's action with lipoprotein lipase is suspected to reset your fat storage pattern away from visceral fat and increase visceral fat burning. There's also a theory that with sustained use over an extended period, it reinforces a lower body weight set point. Tirzepatide can also improve, repair, or restore insulin function in diabetic or insulin-resistant patients. The GIP agonist in tirzepatide does this by strengthening and protecting the cells in your pancreas that create insulin and helping to recruit stem cells to create new insulin-making cells. Combining the two agonists enhances the effects of GLP-1 for superior weight reduction compared to a GLP-1 agonist alone. And last but not least, because it acts on receptors in both the upper and lower gut instead of only the upper gut, there are fewer and less intense gastrointestinal side effects for some people. Tirzepatide isn't the only dual agonist in the mix. Novo Nordisk is currently running phase 3 trials of its new medication, CagriSema, which is a combination of semaglutide and the amylin receptor agonist, cagrilintide. Amylin is another hormone released by your pancreas that induces satiety, the feeling of fullness when we eat. It reduces glucagon secretion after meals, activates the central satiety pathway in your hypothalamus, and it acts on the hedonistic or pleasure-seeking center in your brain by inhibiting feeding reward neurocircuits. The benefits of this agonist are improved appetite suppression and satiety through slowed gastric emptying and reduced food intake, and a reduction in the amount of pleasure your brain feels from eating food, so you eat less. Studies are also showing that people lose more weight at the highest dosage of CagriSema when compared to tirzepatide. Last but not least, Eli Lilly is currently in active clinical trials for an even more ambitious medication, a triple agonist. That's right, an anti-obesity medication that targets 3 different hormones. Lilly's newest medicine is called retatrutide, nicknamed Triple G. That's because it targets the same 2 receptors as tirzepatide and adds a third agonist for glucagon. The added boost directly to the glucagon receptor will enhance the fat-burning power of this medication for even more impressive results than what people are already seeing on tirzepatide. Y'all, we made it to the end of Bootcamp 3. If you watched all 3 videos, congratulations. I hope you've broadened your understanding of how these medications do what they do, how it's bringing people to heights of success in their weight loss that they've never seen before, myself included, and how you could be the next person who takes that leap of faith into transforming your life. Now, let's try something a little different to finish out this video. Instead of doing a normal knowledge check, I've got a knowledge challenge for you. There's a lot of misinformation and shaming around taking these medications, sometimes even among the people who are taking it themselves. One of the biggest reasons I wanted to do this bootcamp series was to give people an understanding of exactly how revolutionary these medications truly are, how this is absolutely not diet business as usual. This isn't cheating, how for a lot of people, obesity really is a chronic disease process and not a moral failing. First, in the comments on this video, show me what you know by answering this question using the information that you've learned from any of the 3 bootcamp videos. Give me one reason why GLP-1 medications are a revolution in weight loss and the fight against obesity. Second, hit subscribe. And if you're already a subscriber, thank you. Please hit the like button so YouTube knows to share this video with other people who need to hear the gospel of GLP-1. And that's the tea on how GLP-1 medications work. If you think GLP-1 medications could be right for you, talk to a medical professional, preferably an endocrinologist or an obesity medicine specialist, because those are the people who know how these medications work the best. As always, I'm not a doctor and I'm not sponsored by or a representative of any pharmaceutical companies. I'm just sharing my own experience and giving my own opinions. And finally, if you find my channel helpful, hit that trifecta: like, subscribe, notifications, and I'll see you on the other side.